Good morning, good morning. Oh, it's a lovely sunny morning this morning. Oh, I could have gone then. I can go now. No, I can't. I can go now. How are you? I hope you're well. Just on my way to work. On a different way today. Exciting, isn't it? Okay. So, it's how did Keir Starmer describe it? We're at a crossroads in history. I don't know if it's a crossroads. Crossroads implies that there's three ways forward. A fork implies there's two ways forward. And I think we were at a fork, and in fact we've gone past it. So it's not. Fork implies you've got a choice of two directions, but I think the choice has already been made. Insofar as the European American alliance is now no longer what do you call it? Can no longer be assumed. President Trump has starting to do things, throw his weight around, throw his heft about, and so things are changing. The Palestinians, who never don't really have anybody fighting for them, they should do, but they don't. It's bad news for them, because he's announced that he's going to turn Palestine into a waterfront beach resort and golf course. The Iranians have been told that they're going to have to wind their necks back in talks between the United States and Iran are going to be mediated by the Russians, believe it or not. This is all because of Trump and Putin's understanding as world leaders. They've come to a realization that they've been making it very difficult for each other, and they don't need to. They can make it easier. So Trump has Zelensky, who's been fighting in Ukraine for the last 2 or 3 years, thinking that he was holding back the Russian Western Front, on behalf of the West, including the United States, has now been told that, in fact, while he was donating the manpower, the equipment and the tanks and all of that were on loan, and so they'd like, the Americans would like to be paid for that now. And the way that they're proposed to recover it is by basically looting Ukraine, which is in the form of a bilateral deal to extract minerals. Now, America is short of rare earth materials. These are the ones with the stupid names that you're getting crossword puzzles like yttrium and beryllium and erbium and all that lot. And Russia isn't. So it's one way that Russia could get a real commercial advantage on the US is by being able to develop, and these things are used in electronics for the most part. And electronics is basically AI, it's weapons, it's all sorts of technology that the Russians will have access to and the Americans won't, and they need to find these rare earth materials. They've just finally wised up to the fact that that's what they're short of. And not only that, but the world supply really of these elements is in the hands of their enemies, China and Russia, So Trump, who doesn't know they're called rare earth materials, he calls them raw earth materials. And at the recent press conference he spent with Zelensky, he spent the whole time calling them raw earth materials, and nobody had the balls to interrupt him or tell him that he was saying it wrong. But his deal to extract all the rare earth materials from Ukraine was rather hoping that it would be backed up with a security guarantee from the Americans. And the Americans don't wish to make anything like that sort of a guarantee, which is odd. It strikes me as odd because the Ukrainians used to have nuclear weapons. They used to have the Russian nuclear weapons because they were part of USSR. And now, and they agreed to give up nuclear weapons in return for a security guarantee from the West against invasion by Russia. And so I don't know why, but apparently they're not mentioning that on the BBC, and they're not mentioning it on in general. So there's all sorts of things that aren't getting mentioned. The fact that Trump spent the whole press conference calling them raw earth materials instead of rare earth materials has never been mentioned. I don't know if, that's more likely that nobody's picked that up because nobody's got a Danny what's going on. And the funny thing is that Ukraine actually does not have all that much in the way of rare earth materials anyway. They've got a bit of tungsten, which is useful. And I suppose like any other country in Europe, they've got a few rare earths, but not anything like the massive deposits that, you would think that Ukraine was like, the rare earths to Ukraine was like gold is to South Africa or Australia. The way that they're going on about how they're going to get all these rare earths from Ukraine. But apparently the fact that the Americans are, I've got mining operations in Ukraine is supposed to reassure the Ukrainians that the Americans will safeguard and protect those mining operations against Russian incursion. So they're saying it's like a security guarantee, but I don't know whether I would, if I was Ukrainian president, I would regard that as a security guarantee. I was just like, that's like a girl having an abusive boyfriend and being told to be happy because he will protect her against an even more abusive boyfriend. So that's why I say we've gone down a fork, and the fork is that the Americans are certainly disengaging from Europe, and the reason why is, and this is all falls into the big picture I'm sure I've mentioned before, which is, and I know it all comes back to money, but we don't have sound money. Money is losing its purchasing power, and when that happens, you have a sort of a fall of regime, breakdown of commerce, breakdown of civil society, breakdown of government. And it's happened many times in history. Any civilization you care to name has broken down in the end because the money's become worthless, and so they can't organise themselves. So you're going to have more weirdness. That's all I can describe it, because you don't know how it's going to manifest itself. It could manifest itself as population not being able to afford a house, or mainly America, who's the world's biggest debtor, is now realising that having ignored the fact that they've been running up such a debt, for years and years and years, kick the can down the road, as they say, is now coming to terms with the fact that they have a ton of money, and even with high inflation is going to cause a restless populace and end up with politicians being strung up on lampposts, and so they can't really even let the inflation run as fast as they'd like to devalue the amount that they owe. It's a very difficult situation that's going to involve a lot of grief for everybody concerned. So yeah, so what they do, they've got Musk trying to save a bit of money, which he is doing, but more importantly, is acting as a sort of a flagship indicator that the government, the Trump government, is serious about debt and wants to cut the size of government, because that's really what it boils down to. You can't increase taxes beyond a certain point, and at some point you have to cut the size of government, and that's what Doge and Elon Musk is supposed to be doing. But they can't. They can't. They're unless they reduce Medicare, Medicaid, armed forces spending, all the big budget items, Social Security in the United States. They can't reduce the size of government enough to make any sort of appreciable difference to their debt. They just literally, month before last, they had $122 billion trade deficit, which means that they bought more than they sold worldwide. And last month they blew, and that was the biggest on record. Last month they blew through that with 150 billion something. So it's not like things are even going in the right direction. It's like, it's like someone who's got a credit card and they got another credit card to pay off the interest payments on the first credit card, and then they get a third credit card to pay off the interest payments on the first two credit cards. And then the United States is about 100 credit cards down the line, and finally they've decided that they're never going to pay the money back, so they decide to go on a world cruise with the balance of the latest credit card. So all of this has been most disconcerting to the markets, because the markets are consistent of traders, who are trying to buy and sell, buy low, sell high, but most of them were not alive in the 1970s when the really last high inflation, and were not alive really before the government started propping up the stock market. So the government, as we've discussed before, needs to spend money. So what they do is they write an IOU to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve then authorises the Treasury to print money to the exact same amount. So because these IOUs, the Federal Reserve buys these IOUs, and they've got a fixed rate of interest, and so strangely enough, the more they buy them for, the lower the interest rate is. But when nobody wants them, the interest rate goes up. And at the moment, nobody really wants them because there are too many of them. So what's happening is that anybody who wants to borrow some money is not going to borrow it at say anything more than they need to. And so because these bonds are not worth much, the interest rates are higher, and so the banks then say, well, you can get 6% off a bond, so we'll charge you 6% as well. So everybody ends up paying more interest. Interest rates go up, and we've just been through an extended period of very, very low interest rates where everybody got 0% or 1% or 2% or whatever, and everybody got drunk on cheap credit. And now all these loans are coming up to be refinanced, and they're all needing to be refinanced at 2, 3, 4 times the original rate. And the markets are they're having to function properly. In other words, they can't, things don't go the way that the government wants. For example, they can't sell more bonds, because if they sell even more bonds, then relative to the number of bonds around, the interest rates will go up even more, because nobody will want a bond, and so the price of bonds will go right down, and so interest rates will shoot right up. And the government can't afford that because it owes so much money. It needs to keep interest rates down, so it's in a bit of a cleft stick at the moment. Can't sell bonds to raise money, and it needs to sell bonds to pay the interest on the bonds it's already sold. So the markets are used to the Federal Reserve and the Treasury intervening to keep things, rosy. And now going to have to start earning their salaries and start doing some actual work and start actually working out how things work and start working out the real value of things like stocks and shares and the real value of things like houses and the real value of things like companies and government bonds. They can no longer do what they've always done, which is what they always did last week. They're always like, well, what's happening this week? Well, pretty much the same as last week. We're buying this, we're selling that. We're buying this, we're selling that. What's everybody doing today? Oh, we're buying this or we're selling that. They can't do this anymore. They're really decisions coming out on a day-to-day basis. Things like oil, for example. Some people are saying, well, oil is going up. Other people are saying, well, oil is going down. If you believe that all this American exceptionalism and America First type action from Trump is going to depress the economy, bearing in mind that they've just had today, they've imposed 15% tariff on Canadian goods, except for 10% tariff on oil, energy. And because the Canadians send the North of America quite a lot of energy. And then they've got 15% tariff on Mexican goods. And everyone's now waiting to see what they're going to do with European goods, because Trump doesn't like VAT on American goods. So he thinks he's going to probably put 15% minimum on European goods. Then we don't know what he's going to do with the UK, because we cling on to this old-fashioned idea of a special relationship. Although why a right-wing American president should have a special relationship with probably the only far left-wing Labour government in Europe, I don't know. But Starmer's dead chuffed, because he's stepped up on the international stage, having been a dead loss on the domestic stage. He's stepped up on the international stage and he's now seen as the mediator between America and Europe on things like tariffs and aid for Ukraine and stuff like that. So he's starting to make himself look a bit, because every failing leader who's failing nationally yearns for an international summit where they can be seen, photographed, pressing the flesh with real, proper, successful people to make them look good, by implication, makes them look good. So Starmer's more than happy on the international stage, and we might never see him again. I think we might have lost him completely. But I don't know what he's on a hiding to nothing, really, because I can see this as a proper, I always say, don't look at what people say, look at what they do. And Trump is a doer. He has done a ton of stuff. And he's got a ton more stuff to do. I make that forecast as well. Don't think that he's, in his first sort of 30 days, he's done everything that he wants to do. He's only just starting. He's just warming up. He's just finding his feet. He's got the stick of power, and he's using it. Not that I don't like the fact that Zelensky's been told that he's basically his only option really for peace is to surrender, which is basically what he's been told. He's basically been told he's not getting any more tanks or anything, which means that he's more or less going to be forced into a surrender. And, that's great. That's going to save a load of lives in what is effectively a pointless war. To arrive at a situation which I forecast when the war started, which is that the Russians are going to get to keep all the river, all the land pretty much east of the river, and Ukraine is going to keep everything to the west, backed up by a European security guarantee. So, and in order to have known that, you need to look at what they call the Winter War, the war that Russia had with Finland, where they did exactly the same thing. What they do, Russia's they're very predictable in terms of their how they fight wars. What they do is they launch a surprise attack, which everybody thinks is completely is unpredictable because it's so crazy. They then chuck a load of troops in and keep chucking troops in. They don't care how many of Russian soldiers die. They didn't in the Second World War, and they don't now. If you sign up for the Russian army, you've got a very short lifespan. Your family gets quite well paid, but you come from a village, you offered a fortune, sign up for the armed forces, and like within a couple of weeks you're just red mist drifting across the Ukrainian wheat field. And they keep doing that until the other side runs out of the will to fight, or the manpower, or they run out of bullets and shells. And they got to keep part of Finland. Part of what was Finland is now in Russia because of precisely this tactic. And it's so, you have to guard against a surprise attack by Russia. You can't get the land back. Once they've grabbed it, they hang on to it like a dog with a bone, and you can't get it back. You have to agree to give it up and take it as a lesson learned and make sure it doesn't happen again. I think frankly they probably wanted to seize more, didn't they? They wanted to seize the whole of Ukraine. So in fact, the fact that they've only got the bit east of the river, I suppose, is Ukraine's not going to think that they come out of it well, but I don't know, they haven't come out of it too badly, to be honest. And I think that's what most people are going to say. Not that Zelensky hasn't quite twigged that. That's why he's been sent to sit on the naughty chair. It's because he hasn't quite twigged the fact that the war's lost. He wants to carry on fighting and push the Russians back to the pre-existing border. Well, I mean, honestly, I could do a complete podcast lasting 8 hours on pre-existing borders that are no longer observed. If we put everybody's borders back where they claim they're supposed to be, we'd have to recreate the Ottoman Empire. It's realpolitik, isn't it? And they call it. It's all very well, what's right. It's not always what's right. It's who's strongest. That's what war is all about. It's all about force. The application of force to get what you want. Well, it can't be achieved by pursuit of diplomacy by other means, I think is the phrase. So anyway, if I think of anything you can do to help get you through, I shall let you know. But just try and keep focused on the model, yeah? Make sure you keep your model correct, because if your model's correct, you'll be able to forecast for yourself what you need to do and how things are going to work out. Right then, there we are. Anyway, no dentistry today, but I hope it was useful. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.